My dear brothers and sisters, we could say that today the Scriptures speak to us about God's providence, God's provision. We hear in the first reading Isaiah, who is having this vision, and in the midst of this vision he becomes acutely aware of where he is lacking, where he is in need of purification. He recognizes that his generation and himself have been infected by this impurity of mouth, if you would, these unclean lips, he says. And what does God do? God does not say, well, go first away from me and figure it out, and then when you have purified yourself, come back. He doesn't do that. No, God sends one of the seraphim with a burning coal to burn Isaiah's mouth. Isn't that great? Yeehaw. The idea being, of course, that the burning coal purifies, right? It purifies. We want to remember that the seraphim, for those of us who don't speak Hebrew, are the burning ones. They are the angels that are the closest to God's throne. Why are they burning? Because God is an all-consuming fire. His love is an all-consuming fire. People say, there's that expression, they'll say it's hot outside. Well, look, there's another place where it's hotter, and I always say it's hotter in heaven. It is. It's hotter in heaven. Because God's love is an all-consuming fire. The point, though, is this. It doesn't burn us if we allow God to transform us into fire. That's why Jesus told his disciples that we would all be baptized in the Holy Spirit and fire. Actually, that was John the Baptist talking about Jesus. And then Jesus said that we would all be salted with fire. And then when the Holy Spirit fell upon the apostles and the disciples at Pentecost, he came as tongues of? Fill in the blank. Come on. What was that? Fire. Good. Okay. See, I learned something when I was teaching at St. Thomas, that if I have some feedback, that you guys will actually learn something too. I'm the same way. I have to participate or say something or process it. So, anyway, we see then the words of Jesus specifically speaking about God knows everything that's going on. He knows everything we need. This is very key. This is very important for us, because sometimes we can think, I have to go figure it all out. No, God is saying to us, do not be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. If God sent for Isaiah to be purified a coal from the altar that would cleanse him of sin, specifically for whatever particular sin he was prone to, though not necessarily happily falling into, maybe unhappily falling into, how much more will God, our Father in heaven, send to us coals from an altar that are burning to cleanse us? Jesus in the Eucharist, not a coal, but the very God himself, who is an all-consuming fire, comes to us in this Eucharist, and we receive that very Eucharist. We could call it basically communion with fire in a way. It's interesting that in the Eastern Catholic Church, if you ever go down to St. Basil's for one of their divine liturgies, after receiving communion, the priest will hold up the chalice and the spoon that he has used, because they will dish out the communion, the bread and the wine together, the precious body and the precious blood together in a spoon. And people have to receive it a little bit differently than we do. He holds those up and he says, "See, these have touched your lips. They shall cleanse you of all sin." We as Catholics believe that when we come to the Eucharist with our small venial sins, that Jesus wipes them away. And more so, we hear in the Catechism that Jesus augments our union with him through communion. Augments means that it gets more. It's bigger. It's made bigger. So every time we receive communion, we should become holier. And it's okay if we haven't seen that, because maybe we haven't been expecting that. Interestingly enough is this, that God, who is willing to send these coals, of communion, we should say, right? This purifying presence of God in communion, isn't satisfied necessarily with just purifying us. He then sends us the way he sent Isaiah to be a purifying presence. Because when somebody is living a holy life, it changes the atmosphere. And we could say that about Saint Kateri Tekakwitha, whom we celebrate today. For those of you who do not know, she was one of the Mohawk Indians. She was a Christian, and she began to live a life that was a little bit different than the other Mohawks, specifically because she adopted Christianity, but then also because she dedicated her life to prayer and to God and to works of charity. Eventually, she would have to move more toward where the French-Canadian priests were, and they would often see her glowing after prayer. One of the priests would say, "Kateri, do you love God?" And she would just exclaim with delight, "Oh, Father, oh, Father." And she lived this life of extraordinary holiness. Now, I want to point out that here at St. Thomas Aquinas, this church has been blessed with a stained glass window of St. Kateri, even before she was ever proclaimed blessed, because she was the unofficial patron saint of Quebec. And so it was common devotion, popular devotion, that had people make a stained glass window. She's right there, right next to St. Therese. There she is. She's in Indian garb. That's St. Kateri Tekakwitha. Must have been prophetic that we knew that she was going to be canonized. What do we need purification from? What is God placing on our heart to entrust him with? We don't necessarily all have to become dedicated in our virginity to God in order to do that, because God also purifies us to live whatever state of life we're called to, whether it's marriage, single life, religious life, priesthood. And he does it through the all-consuming fire of his love that he incarnates in the Blessed Sacrament. So today we entrust whatever in our lives needs purification to Jesus, who's going to be coming to us in the Eucharist, and we ask Jesus to transform us into a purifying presence as well.